Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition. Well, I guess I should say, since our last talk, I don't know that we had officially named this.
No, I think we left it at whiskey and something.
Something we did. But anyway, since then, we have come up with the brilliant name of Drunk Agile. So hopefully look for drunkagile.com, coming to a website near you. Again, my name is Daniel Vacanti, and joining me is
Prateek Singh.
And I think we start off every night. I don't know, do we do the topic or the whiskey first? I forget.
I think we wanted to do the whiskey first last time, but we did the topic first, but I think we should do whiskey first.
Let's do the whiskey first. Do you want to start with yours?
Yeah. I have a beautiful sherry cask Aktashan. It's at 59.9%. In fact, this is a bottle that Dan had bottled himself at the distillery. And I know, and you can finally go on record saying that you regret giving me this bottle.
You beat me to it. As always, you're stealing my thunder. I definitely regret letting that one out of my collection, but at least it's being drunk in a good cause. Yeah. I also decided to go with an Auchentoshan. This is a 19-year-old, 52.4%. It's actually double aged. It was first in a bourbon barrel, but then second in a Chateau Lafite barrel.
Oh, that bourbon barrel is probably why it has a darker color than.
Yeah. So we're just kind of looking at the color. It has kind of that kind of more golden color. So anyway, cheers to everybody. Cheers to Prateek, and let's see if we can get our topic out of the way before we get drunk. So just before we started the call, you might see behind Prateek, we were kind of, taking some notes in terms of some things that we might want to cover. We're definitely not going to get through all of these things in this episode, but hopefully it's a progression as we go through. So the last episode, assuming we're doing these in order, the last episode was talking about story points and the problem with story points in general, just from an estimation perspective, from a forecasting perspective, and things like that. So we decided, well, okay, since we hopefully have debunked the whole story point thing, what is its replacement? Well, before we get into the replacement, we kind of have to go through a whole evolution of I don't know what level setting, background.
Yeah, how to even shift the mindset from where traditional methods have taken the mindset to.
Exactly. So one of the biggest problems, if you remember from our last episode, one of the biggest problems with story points is it kind of anchors us in this idea of deterministic thinking. This idea that we can know the future with 100% certainty up front, which hopefully by the end of this episode, you will understand that is just definitely not the case. So I don't know if you want to kick us off with some thoughts about deterministic thinking and why it's bad, or.
Yeah, I mean, it's you kind of started down that path, right? It's almost every other walk of life, almost everything else in life, we forecast or we predict probabilistically. We never believe that there is one outcome, whether it's sports, whether it's driving to work, whatever it is. In fact, or it's as you say in your project behaves like a hurricane talk, whether it's life and death forecast with hurricanes, where we talk about a range of probabilities and what are the odds of each of these coming up.
Okay, well, so can you say a little bit more about that? Because you talked about sports. You talked about like the commute to work. Maybe most of our people are struggling to think, when I'm watching football, when proper football, not American football, by the way, or when I'm watching cricket, God forbid, why isn't that deterministic? And my drive to work, how is that not? I don't know. Can you say some more about that?
Yeah, since you brought up cricket, we have to talk about this, right?
Oh God. Hold on. I don't think there's enough. I don't think I've got enough, but go ahead.
Well, let's say whether it's cricket, whether it's football, let's say the World Cup's coming up. I mean, you're gonna go as pretending this is Cricket World Cup. I want India to win. That is where I would want to put my money. but I cannot be 100% sure that India will win. I might have 100% desire that India wins, but it's not 100% sure. Each team, whatever 16 teams that are playing the World Cup, each one of them has a certain probability, a certain odds of winning. Same for a football World Cup. Same for the NFL. The team that is going to win the Super Bowl is not 100% lock in till they have actually won the Super Bowl. Every team is a probability, is a possibility, and has a probability attached to it.
Right. Speaking of which, I mean, a great example of that in recent times was when Leicester City won the Premier League.
Yep.
When was that? Was that 2 years ago?
2 years ago? I think it was 2 years ago.
I think it was 2 years ago. Anyway, I should know this. All you Leicester City fans, my apologies. But they started the season at what, 5,000 to 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
5,000 to 1 odds. And maybe if we were prepared, we could kind of talk about really what those 5,000 to 1 odds, really mean. Like,
Yeah.
our like you said, our chances of trying to work, or chances of dying in a plane crash, or whatever, chances of contracting COVID-19, whatever it is. But yeah, there's that. But what about the driving to work? How is that probabilistic?
Well,
So I look at Google and I put in my number, and it says 39 minutes. It says exactly 39 minutes. Isn't that what that means?
But if you drive for 2 minutes or 5 minutes and look at it again, they've probably changed it.
Yeah.
That's the fun part. I take that almost the exact same. Well, not these days, but when I used to drive to work, I took the same route to work every day. But every day, the amount of time it would take door to door would be different. So Google can give you a high degree of confidence estimate, and we'll talk a bit about that probably in this episode and following episodes. Google can give you a high degree of confidence estimate, but what it does really well is, as you go further in, it revises its estimate, it revises its forecast as you go in. Yeah.
So and this is something, hopefully, yeah, like you said, whether we touch on it in this episode or some future episode, there's certainly a better job, I think anyway, there's certainly a better job that Google Maps or whatever could do in terms of communicating that. Because I think most people, when they pull up maps and they enter in the address and they see 39 minutes, they think, oh, Google, it says 39, right? Google obviously knows what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So that means it's going to be 39 minutes with 100% certainty. And what they don't understand is kind of, maybe potentially what they don't understand is what you're talking about is in the background. Google is constantly updating that forecast. And so that 39 minutes is probably more like, at the 95th percentile or 85th percentile or something like that. And I think that's really where we need to get to when we're starting to talk about deterministic versus probabilistic thinking is, as you just said, 100% does not exist in our world. When we're talking about forecasts, 100% just does not exist. So now, once we're less than 100%, we throw determinism out the window, and we have to start taking a more probabilistic approach, because what that means is there's risk involved. There's risk involved, and the forecasts that we communicate have to somehow communicate how much risk is involved. So, I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, let me ask you something though. If people have used deterministic forecasts for a long time, I mean, almost every forecast you come along on a daily basis has this exact number on it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk more about what that number really means, or what you were just talking about having confidence intervals or relaying more of a probabilistic approach, but traditionally we've used deterministic forecasts for a long time.
Can I talk about it? No. Well, so I don't know if you're asking about how our customers interpret that number, or why those methods themselves fail, or are you talking?
Sort of all of the above, in the sense that I think, one, how do you think our customers take that number when we give them a number? When I say 30 days, what is the customer thinking? And two, the traditional methods that we use to come up with 30 days,
Yep.
What's the confidence attached with that?
Yep. Yeah. So let's talk about this. And uh, it's an example. It's one of my classic examples that I like to give in a lot of my talks. Is, let's say we're working on a project, and that project has gone for 1 week, and in that 1 week we got 12 stories done. Okay? Let's further say that we know there are 120 stories left in our backlog. Right? So we've worked for 1 week, we got 12 stories done, there's 120 stories left in our backlog. Traditionally, how might we figure out, when will that project be done?
10 weeks. Duh, easy.
Well, yeah, traditional methods would say something like, yeah, well, duh, you take the 120 divided by 12, you get 10, and it's 10 weeks. The problem is, so when we communicate that 10 weeks to our customers, what are our customers thinking? Our customers are, again, thinking, just like with the Google Maps example, they said 10 weeks. They must, or even worse, if we were to say, 7.2 weeks, right? If we were to give some ridiculous precision associated with the number, our customers are going to think, oh, wow, these people really must know what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. It's got to be exactly 10 weeks. But as you know where we're going, what's the problem with that 10-week number? Can you maybe help us out with understanding what's the problem with 10 weeks, given that answer?
The problem is, actually, the problem is very well described by a book called The Flaw of Averages. What we're really doing is doing a regression. We're taking this one number and saying that's our average stories per week. That's multiplied by the number of weeks, and we get to 120. Okay, so that's 10. Yeah, that's Flaw of Averages. And we talk about this all the time. That it's a great book, and the tagline there being "Plans based on average fail on average."
Yeah, so The Flaw of Averages by Dr. Sam Savage. If you haven't read it, you absolutely have to go out and read it. The good news is you only really have to read the first half of the book. Second half of the book is, maybe more, I don't know, dare I say, trivial. But for sure, the message in the first half of the book. But what's interesting, given the context we're in right now, when I'm watching all of these statistics roll in about, COVID-19 cases and, and things like that, you see flaw of averages all over the place. You see it and I can't tell you how many articles I've seen comparing COVID-19 cases with the worst offender that I saw was this article compared this year's COVID-19 cases with the average of the past 9 years of flu, right? And they're like, look, this year is higher than the average of the past 9 years of flu. Classic example of the flaw of averages, because of course, if you're comparing with an average, some years are going to be above and some years are going to be below. That's just the way it works. And so just because you have 1 year that's above, that does not tell you anything. It tells you absolutely nothing, right? This is kind of the second problem I think that you were getting to with communicating in terms of an average. When we say 10 weeks, not only do our customers interpret it as 100% certainty, but we have not given them any other information to get them off that 100%, get them off that anchor that it is 100%. Especially if we're dealing with an average, we're probably, and potentially at best, somewhere around 50% certainty when we're talking about an average.
Yeah, that was kind of that for me was the biggest revelation when I started reading into this stuff a lot more and talking to you about this. Was it's amazing that I have in past communicated forecasts based on averages, but I have never added oh yeah, I'm only 50% confident in this.
Yeah.
I'm sure most people have, but usually no one hears that second part of, or no one communicates the second part of, yeah, it's going to be 30 days, but I'm 50% confident that it'll be 30 days.
Yep. And we should talk about at some point, maybe not now, but maybe now. So not only is there education needed in terms of the people doing these things to communicate a forecast, or to generate the forecast and communicate it, but there's also education that's needed to be done on the customer side to understand, because when when we talk about humans and thinking probabilistically, we are just terrible, just absolutely terrible at thinking probabilistically. So if a customer hears, oh, you've got, 50% chance of being done within 10 weeks, or you have an 85% chance of being done within 20 weeks, do they really understand how to think about those things? Or will they just say, oh, well, of course, we're going to go with the 10 weeks number. I don't know if we should talk about that now or maybe later, but
well, I think we've hit upon it a couple of times already, because your Google Maps example is exactly that, right? That it says 39 minutes, but it doesn't convey with it how confident Google is in saying 39 minutes. As a customer, I would just take that. I would just go, hey, 39 minutes, that's what it is.
Right.
But I think there is definitely some room for conveying the forecast with some probability and having the customer understanding it as well.
Okay, well, so let's maybe take a step back, because we've really kind of jumped into kind of the deep end of probabilistic thinking, and maybe haven't quite explained. I know you and I have talked about this so many times that hopefully we're not talking over people's heads here. But what does it really mean to think probabilistically? We've said a lot about determinism. A deterministic world is, you believe you've got 100% certainty, right? I guess whether you believe it or not, you kind of making this implicit assumption that there is 100% certainty. So when we say we're not in a deterministic world, we're in a probabilistic world, I mean, what does that really mean? I mean, how do I think probabilistically? How do I interpret that? You know what I mean? What can you give us some tips in terms of how to start thinking probabilistically?
Well, I mean, tip number one is first just accepting that there is more than one result.
Yeah.
Right. There's more than one result possible, and then probably the easiest thing to do is to start thinking in terms of to start thinking in this direction is to start thinking in terms of binary results. Just my favorite example, and I know my wife will watch this later, so she'll yell at me then, is my wife going to buy something on Amazon today or not? The answer could be yes or no.
I don't know. That's fairly deterministic. I don't know. That's that's probably not a good example.
If I, especially before we went into quarantine, if I looked at my Amazon history, I guess the question should have been how many things, not if.
Yeah, there you go.
But let's start binary. If I looked at my last 60 days of her Amazon account history, and if she had bought something, let's say, 54 of those 60 days, then I would say there's a 90%, my recent history at least tells me, there's a 90% chance, based on my recent past, that she's going to buy something. Now, frankly, if I look at the last 30 days, it's probably a 100% chance. So that's when we get into the next step of it. Well, once we've gone past binary, now let's say, is she going to buy one thing? Is she going to buy two things? Is she going to buy 3 or 4 things?
Right.
And that's how I would start thinking about it.
But yeah, so let's pause and stress that for just a second, because to me that's the crux of the issue. Is whenever we start thinking probabilistically, it just means a fundamental acknowledgement that there is more than one possible future outcome. Mm-hmm. It's like, when we flip a coin or we're rolling a die or whatever, there's more than one possible future outcome. And before the event, we can't say, again, with 100% certainty, which outcome is going to happen. And generally speaking, each outcome or each range of outcomes will have a probability associated with it. But I think people need to understand that, right? Before we do anything, like especially in software development, before we start on the story, before we start on the project, before we start on the whatever, there is more than one possible outcome. The story could get done in 2 days. It could get done in 3. It could get done in 43, right? We just don't know when that item is sitting in the backlog. Thankfully, there are some tools that we can use to kind of model what those probabilities might be, which hopefully we'll get into, like I said, probably in some later episode. But just so everybody's clear, thinking probabilistically is just simply acknowledging there's more than one possible future outcome, and we don't know which one's going to happen.
Yeah. I don't know how political we want to get with this, but we'll not not too much, I guess.
Yeah, go
But
for it. Go for it. I mean,
just before,
there's plenty of whiskey in the world.
there's plenty of whiskey. Hey, some folks might need to drink some too if you're listening / watching this. Just before the 2016 election results came out, I remember actually right after that. I remember after Donald Trump got elected, there was this backlash against Nate Silver that he is no longer able to predict elections.
He got it wrong. Yeah, there was everybody. Oh,
Yeah.
Nate Silver got it wrong. Nate Silver got it wrong. Yeah.
I found it amazing because I was following the exit polls and the polling on his website for a while, and on election eve, his numbers showed a 21% chance of, actually 23% chance.
Close to 25%. Yeah.
Of Donald Trump getting elected, and the remainder was for Hillary Clinton. In other words, 1 out of 4 elections Donald Trump wins. We should not be surprised that outcome happened, because the answer was never a yes or a no. The answer was never Trump or Hillary. The answer should have always been X% probability it's Trump, Y% probability it's Clinton. And that's, I think it goes back to the point that you were making earlier, that even us as consumers of information are not, have not been educated in the way to understand that information very well. And I think that's why there was this big backlash against Nate Silver, saying he got it wrong. Meanwhile, to a good extent, I think he got it right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think he certainly gave a much higher probability of Trump winning than most did, for sure. And I agree. Yeah, absolutely. We should not be surprised. I mean, on average, Trump wins every 4th election. It just so happens he won that first one, right?
Yep.
He would have probably lost the next 3 or 4. But whatever. That's again, law of averages type thinking there. But what's, I think, and I had something profound to say. Oh, I think what we should talk about again later, and we keep saying that every time we say, "Hey, we're going to talk about this later." We're going to take a drink. Right? That's going to be our new. That's going to be our new drinking game.
These will get done real fast.
But this is going to be one of the problems that we're going to have to solve, or at least consider, when we start talking about building models to communicate forecasts. Is when we get a result that is not something that we were, necessarily expecting, like Trump winning an election.
Right.
The question necessarily has to be, well, did we just get unlucky? Which is a possibility, or is the model wrong? Was the model just giving us wrong information? And making a distinction between those two things is difficult, if not impossible. So that would be interesting to kind of talk about some of the things you might look for that. I for one would say I don't know that I have a good answer for that.
Yeah, I think that's the second degree of probabilistic thinking, which if degree 1 is hard, yeah.
Yeah, we're meta now at that point.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so bringing it back to deterministic versus probabilistic. So we've talked about the flaw of averages. We've talked about communicating things in terms of a deterministic, single precise number versus giving a probability. What are some other things that we need to say when we're considering deterministic versus probabilistic thinking? How do we start, moving the needle? How do we start making people make this paradigm shift from deterministic thinking to probabilistic thinking?
Yeah. As far as human understanding and behavior goes, I'm not that certain. This is where I think we need to lean on some of the work, like nudges from Richard Taylor and that kind of stuff. How do we move the needle in that? Because it also depends on, as you said, how do we communicate this forecast, and how do we make it palatable? That we have these range of answers, and these are the probabilities for each of those answers. Somehow it seems like folks in Vegas have figured it out when they make odds.
Absolutely.
Somehow they've figured it out.
So I think you've hit on something that we definitely should maybe go a little bit deeper on, is that a lot of people think when we start talking about probabilities and maybe even taking a step back, when we're talking about kind of randomness in general, because that's really what we're talking
Mhm.
about is how we're dealing with random processes. We're dealing with stochastic processes. Maybe we remember the conversation we had in Brighton about random versus stochastic. I mean,
Yeah,
we should
yeah. That will require everyone to have a lot more whiskey.
yeah, we should have recorded that one too. But anyway, when we're dealing in this probabilistic world, and I've already had too much to drink because now I've completely lost my train of thought. What was I talking about before? Do you
You
even
were
remember?
talking. You were taking a step back from probabilistic thinking.
Yeah, we're gonna have to rewind the tape and maybe
Maybe it'll
edit
spark something.
yeah,
That
edit
was.
this part.
I think
What's that?
we went into Taylor and nudge and how do we communicate and help people understand.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's gone.
okay. It's
Maybe drunk agile is maybe not a good idea. I don't know.
I disagree.
Oh yeah, because we were talking about casinos and
Yeah,
now and I
we,
remember. Thank you. See, just had to have a sip. When we're talking about random processes or stochastic processes, most people equate randomness with unpredictability. And so I
yes.
think that's why your casino example is so apropos, because just because you have a random process, and here's the deal. I mean, we need people to understand that probability is intrinsic to what we do. It's not a result of what we do.
Mhm.
It's intrinsic to what we do. So because we're kind of dealing with random processes, we think of cycle time as a random process or throughput as a random process and things like that. However, random does not mean not predictable.
Yep.
Random processes can be very predictable. This is something that, quantum physicists had to grapple with way back
Mhm.
when they were checking out classical physics, and going to quantum. I mean, randomness is just intrinsic to nature, but just because it's random doesn't mean that we can still not start making predictions about certain behavior. And so that's the good news, because we've been talking all this time about, well, there's no such thing as 100%. Most people think, well, if there's no 100%, how do I plan? How do I forecast? How do I do all those things? We can still, the idea is going to be about, from a casino example, how do we maximize our betting strategy, if you will,
Mhm.
over the long term? So we're placing, for the most part, as much as we can, profitable bets.
Yeah, it's actually you just reminded me of another thing, which is I think Annie Duke says this in her book Thinking in Bets. I think she says this in the preface of it, that um, poker hands are completely random. But and people think it's a game of luck, but somehow the same 5 to 6 people end up on the final table of the World Series of Poker every year,
Mm-hmm.
because they have discovered that random does not mean unpredictable, and how they can harness the strategies from that unpredictability.
Right. And so I think that's the good news. I mean, I think that's what people really have to walk away with. As you start shedding this idea that the world is not deterministic, you might be crying, you might be grieving, but really it never was anyway, so you never should have thought that it was deterministic. But the good news, if there is a light at the end of the tunnel, the good news is we can still be predictable. It's just we're going to fundamentally have to change what being predictable means, and just recognize that we are going to be wrong from time to time. We're going to be wrong because that's just how the world works. Right?
Yep.
That's just what it is. The sooner that we can embrace that, I think the more successful we can be in terms of our forecasting.
Yeah, and then and probably, and this is again, we're talking about things that we won't talk about today. Probably even beyond that, once we discover uh, what makes us predictable in a probabilistic world, we work on those things so that we can be more increasingly confident in our predictions.
Yep.
Um,
Right.
same thing that the poker players do, same thing any good professional athlete does. Um, when Tom Brady throws the ball down the field, the difference between it's possible for him, it's possible to miss the receiver or to hit the receiver. For me, it's possible to miss the receiver or hit the receiver, but his probability is a lot higher because he has done a whole bunch of work even towards making himself more predictable.
That's a key point. And again, this is this is probably another episode in itself. But the idea is a lot of the randomness that we experience is under our control, right? We have direct influence over, over it. So this is yet another piece of good news is that we can control while we can't directly determine the outcome, we can control a lot of the randomness that affects us. And when we work, you see this all the time, when we work with teams, a lot of the unpredictability, if you will, in their process is stuff that they're doing to themselves. And by a lot, I mean the majority and potentially a vast majority, a super majority of the randomness that we experience is stuff that's under our control. It's only really going to be a very, very small percentage of that stuff that's completely outside of our control, so now we're getting into variability and things like that, which is that needs to go on the whiteboard. We need to have.
I had modeling up there, but I guess between Monte Carlo and modeling, we should talk about variability.
Probably variability or something like that. So, and that's, and that's key is when we start getting into mining our data and understanding our metrics and things like that, recognizing, all right, what's the stuff that's the data will tell us what's the stuff that's under our control, what's the stuff that's outside of our control, and being able to categorize those things will necessitate a different strategy, right? We'll take one set of actions if the stuff's under our control. We'll take another set of actions if the stuff's not under our control. It seems like common sense, but as everybody knows, common sense is not so common. So I don't know, where are we on the whiteboard? We're kind of all over the place.
Today was supposed to be mostly a deterministic versus probabilistic thinking, and second point was supposed to be thinking in probabilities. I think we've done a pretty decent job of covering those. We might talk a little more about those. Next time was supposed to be just introducing some of the tools, specifically Monte Carlo, as a way to put that probabilistic thinking that we have discovered into practice. We've just added variability as the next topic after that. And then eventually modeling, and how do we make sure that those Monte Carlo simulations or whatever we're running is actually modeling real behavior.
Yep. So I agree. I mean, so if hopefully, so the outcome we're looking for in this video is getting people to shed their notion of determinism and start to embrace probabilistic thinking. The next evolution of that is, okay, well, so now I've embraced probabilistic thinking. What are the tools that are at my disposal to be able to start communicating some of those probabilities to me? And, you touched on one, Monte Carlo. That's for some other time. So I guess to set us up for next time, which will be Monte Carlo, is there anything else that we really need to say about probabilistic thinking so that the people can transition, over to this new world?
The only thing that I would say is that the best predictor of current or future behavior is past behavior. That's the unless we have just discovered efficiencies or whatever, and we're going through a big change, the best behavior is past behavior. The best predictor is the past behavior, and we should be looking to that to inform us of where we're headed.
Yeah, I mean that is a key point, and that's all over the place too. That's Monte Carlo and modeling, right? Right? Does the past that we have data for really reflect the future that we're trying to forecast? And I agree with you. More often than not, it's probably going to be more often than not the case that the past that we do have data for is going to reflect the future, especially if we're doing the things that we talked about, controlling that randomness that we have control over, right? If we can do that, then we can be fairly confident that, hey, the data set that we've got predicts the future. This is one thing, also that we'll get into some other time is we hear this all the time. We go into teams, we just don't have any data, or this is a brand new team. This is a brand new project. We don't have any data. We can't do any forecasting. Chances are, when you really start digging, the problem isn't that you don't have enough data. The problem is you've got too much data, and now we need to filter out and decide, okay, which of that data is really relevant, for our forecasting. So, tell you what, as always, since I'm hosting, I'm happy to give you the last word. If there's anything you want to say in terms of wrapping this episode up, because I think we've
yeah, we've definitely dead this beat horse.
yes.
No,
So,
I think we're nicely set up for the next installment of this. And yes, till then, sláinte.
yes, slant. So yeah, I guess one of the problems going forward with our Drunk Agile series is because we are in quarantine or lockdown right now, slowly opening up. We're gonna be going through our stocks fairly quickly, so we might have some repeats because I keep giving all my good whiskeys away, so we might have some repeats in our whiskeys. But when we get into some of these deeper topics, that's going to require some heavy whiskey drinking.
And maybe as we post these and as we talk about these, I think we would welcome some real life questions out from people watching, because sure, we can if you haven't ever been in a room with either Dan or I, we can talk for hours without listening. So we would like to hear back and see what you guys are thinking, and actually probably answer those questions.
Right. And especially recommendations on whiskey, but none of that peaty, smoky crap, right?
No peaty, smoky,
no peat. Yeah, that doesn't work. Real whiskey drinkers don't drink peat, by the way.
Definitely.
All right. Well, so thanks everybody for listening in on this latest episode of Drunk Agile, and we'll see you in the next episode. Good night and cheers.